Hello and welcome. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michael Griffiths, and today we are going to embark on a thorough exploration of reasoning, its principles, its methodologies, and its broader philosophical implications. Reasoning is the cornerstone of intellectual life. It is how we ask questions, make decisions, and justify our beliefs. It underpins disciplines as diverse as mathematics, science, law, and philosophy. Reasoning is not monolithic. It manifests in various forms, but three methods are foundational: deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, and reductive reasoning. Each represents a different way of thinking about the world. They are tools for navigating complexity, seeking truth, and constructing arguments, but they also have limitations. Together, they form a comprehensive framework for understanding both the microcosm of individual ideas and the macrocosm of interconnected systems. So, over the next few minutes, we're going to explore each of these reasoning methods in some detail, breaking down their mechanics, their strengths, and their weaknesses. We'll also delve into the philosophical debates that they spark and consider how they interact to create a complete picture of thought. So let's begin with deductive reasoning, the most rigorous form of reasoning. Deduction is what we call a top-down approach. It starts with a general principle or premise and applies them to specific cases, ensuring a conclusion that must be true if the premises are true. So what is deductive reasoning? Well, deductive reasoning is about logical necessity. If you accept the premises of a deductive argument and the argument is structured properly, the conclusion is unavoidable. This is why the deduction is at the heart of mathematics, formal logic, and really any discipline where certainty is critical. A classic example is the syllogism. Premise 1, all humans are mortal. Premise 2, I'm a human. Conclusion, therefore, I'm mortal. And this is a valid deductive argument. But why is it valid? Because the conclusion logically follows from the premises. The structure ensures that if the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true. So there are some core concepts in deduction, and those concepts are validity and soundness. So a deductive argument is valid if the conclusion logically follows from the premises. Validity is purely about structure. It doesn't care whether the premises are actually true. So, as an example, premise 1, all cats are immortal. Premise 2, Fluffy is a cat. Conclusion, Fluffy is immortal. So this argument is valid because the conclusion follows from the premises, but it's not sound because the first premise is obviously false. Cats aren't immortal. If only they were. So we then have to have approach the concept of soundness. A deductive argument is sound if it is both valid and has true premises. Only sound arguments guarantee true conclusions. So there are sort of different types of deductive arguments. So the sort of most commonly seen out in the wild, so to speak, will be the categorical syllogisms. That's a mouthful for someone such as myself who has a stutter. So these deal with these categorical syllogisms deal with categories or sets. So, as an example, all philosophers are thinkers. Descartes is a philosopher. Therefore, Descartes is a thinker. So, hopefully that makes sense. You know, that this is essentially about categorization. Another sort of type of deductive argument is conditional reasoning. So these sort of statements, these arguments rather, they use if then statements. So as an example of that, if it rains, the ground will be wet. It's raining, therefore the ground is wet. So that is an if then statement, essentially. And we also have disjunctive reasoning, which deals with either or logic. So as an example, either the light is on or it's off. It's not on, therefore it's off. I know it's kind of a silly sort of example, but I think it highlights it quite well, the sort of structure of it quite well. So deductive reasoning, as one of its strengths, offers absolute certainty. It doesn't rely on probabilities or assumptions. It delivers conclusions that are irrefutable if the premises are correct. This is why it's foundational in fields requiring precision, such as mathematics, computer science, and formal logic. However, deduction has its boundaries. It is not a tool for discovery. Deduction doesn't create new knowledge. It merely clarifies or applies what's already known. Also, it is entirely dependent on the truth of the premises. If your starting assumptions are flawed, even a perfectly valid argument will lead to false conclusions. So deduction assumes a stable, knowable framework of universal truths. But how do we know that these truths are truly universal? For centuries, deductive reasoning rested on premises like the Earth is the center of the universe. And it wasn't deduction that overturned this, it was observation and induction. And this brings us quite nicely to the second form of reasoning, inductive reasoning. If deduction offers certainty, then inductive reasoning provides adaptability. Induction is a bottom-up approach, moving from specific observations to general conclusion. It is probabilistic rather than absolute, making it essential for discovery, prediction, and scientific inquiry. Inductive reasoning starts with specific instances and infers general principles. So, as an example, the sun rose yesterday, the sun rose today, therefore the sun will rise tomorrow. This conclusion feels reasonable, but it's not guaranteed. Unlike deduction, induction does not deal in certainties. It works with likelihoods, meaning that the conclusions are plausible rather than definitive. So let's look at some of the forms of inductive reasoning. And we will start with enumerative induction. So generalizing from observed cases. An example of that would be after observing hundreds of swans, all of which are white. This is a famous one. After observing hundreds of swans, all of which are white, you might conclude that all swans are white. And to highlight the limitation of this form of induction, this conclusion can be overturned by a single counterexample, much like the discovery of black swans in Australia. So that's the sort of enumerative induction. And now let's look at analogical induction, drawing conclusions based on similarities. An example of this is this medication worked for one group of patients, so it might work for others with similar symptoms. Simple enough, right? And the other form of inductive reasoning we're going to have a very brief look at is causal inference, essentially establishing the cause-effect relationship. So, as an example, observing that plants thrive in sunlight leads to the conclusion that sunlight is essential for plant growth. It makes sense, right? It's a very reasonable conclusion to draw. So there are some problems with induction. David Hume famously questioned the justification of induction. Why should we assume that the future will resemble the past? Just because the sun has risen every day doesn't guarantee it will rise tomorrow. This problem of induction highlights a fundamental uncertainty in inductive reasoning. It rests on the assumption that nature is uniform, an assumption that we cannot prove deductively. Despite its uncertainty, induction is indispensable. It allows us to make predictions, form hypotheses, and generalize knowledge. Without induction, science as we know it would not exist. Induction is only as good as the data it's based on. It can lead to false generalizations if the data is incomplete or biased. Moreover, inductive conclusions are always provisional. They must be revised in light of new evidence. And finally, let's discuss reductive reasoning, which is about breaking complex phenomena into their simplest parts. Reductionism is a methodological approach widely used in science and philosophy to make the complex comprehensible. Reductionism assumes that understanding the parts of a system will lead to an understanding of the whole. For example, a biologist might study cells to understand an organism. A physicist might study particles to understand the universe. A philosopher might analyze morality in terms of evolutionary biology. So let's look at some of the forms of reductionism, and we'll start with ontological reduction, explaining entities in terms of their basic components. An example of this is explaining consciousness as a product of neural activity. Another form of reductionism worth looking at is theoretical reduction, i.e. showing that one theory is a special case of another. An example of this is, or would be, that Newtonian mechanics is a subset of Einsteinian physics. And we also have methodological reduction, so simplifying systems for study. An example of this can be found in studying ecosystems by analyzing individual species. Reductionism has been incredibly successful in science by focusing on the smallest components, atoms, neurons, or genes. We've made groundbreaking discoveries. But there are some challenges to reductionism. One of those challenges is emergent properties. Some argue that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Consciousness, ecosystems, and societies may exhibit properties that cannot be fully explained by their components alone. And another challenge to reductionism is oversimplification. By focusing on parts, reductionism risks ignoring the context or interactions that give rise to complex phenomena. Reductionism is often contrasted with holism, which emphasizes the importance of understanding systems as wholes. This tension raises profound questions about the nature of reality and our approach to knowledge. Reasoning it's not about choosing one method over the others, but understanding how they complement each other. So let's look at the sort of interplay of methods, as it were. So we'll start with deduction and induction. Inductive reasoning generates hypotheses that deduction can then test. For example, scientists observe patterns inductively and formalize them into laws, which they then apply deductively. And now let's look at reduction and induction in terms of their sort of interplay. So reductionism often relies on inductive reasoning to identify patterns in smaller components, but it must account for emergent properties. And let's look at the interplay of methods between reduction and deduction. So deductive reasoning thrives in reductionist frameworks, where universal laws govern specific phenomena. So each method of reasoning, deductive, inductive, and reductive, has its role in the quest for knowledge. Deduction provides certainty, induction drives discovery, and reduction simplifies complexity. Together they form a comprehensive toolkit for understanding the world. But reasoning also reflects deeper philosophical questions. Can we ever achieve absolute certainty? Is reality reducible, or does it possess irreducible wholes? And how do we balance certainty with curiosity and simplicity with complexity? Reasoning is both an art and a science. By mastering these methods and reflecting on their implications, we not only become clearer thinkers, but also more thoughtful philosophers. So that is a little glimpse into the world of induction, deduction, and reduction. And these are tools that we all use in our day-to-day lives, even if we don't necessarily sort of realize it in the moment. We use these tools all of the time. And as such, it makes sense to try and understand exactly what frameworks we're working with, because then it allows us to be able to interpret the ideas and thoughts of other people and so on and so forth that we encounter in the world in our day-to-day lives. And also, beyond all of that, it will enable a deeper understanding of these different methods, enables us to formulate better arguments and to have discussions and debates that actually lead us towards truth, rather than getting caught up in, well, nonsense, basically. So they are very, very important, and also not especially complicated or difficult to understand. So I do believe that everybody would benefit from a deeper understanding of deduction, induction, and reduction. So that's it for now. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch and listen. I appreciate you allowing me to aid you on your journey of understanding. And as you've got this far in the video, right to the end, I would like to ask, like all the YouTubers do, if you could feed my massive ego by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Or more seriously, if you do like the video and subscribe to the channel, obviously YouTube will show you more of my content, but they'll also show you more content by other creators that are talking about similar things that will help you to widen that net of discovery and to refine your worldview and so on and so forth. So if you could do that, it'd be wonderful, but there is no pressure. So thank you very much for watching and indeed listening. And I very much look forward to seeing you on the next one.